Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About Sickle Cell, the Sickle Cell podcast straight out of the UK, raising awareness for sickle cell and discussing the ongoing issues that we have to deal with every single day. I'm your host, Janika Leah, and today we have another great interview for you all. Today's guest is Florence Eshalomi MP, a British Labour and cooperative politician serving as the MP for Vauxhall since 2019. She's also the Shadow Minister for Democracy and is currently the Vice Chair for the Sickle Cell and Thalassemia All-Party Parliamentary Group. Florence is one of very few Black female MPs in the UK. So for me personally, it was an absolute honour to have this conversation with her. In this interview, we talk about the continuous systemic and structural racism that is clear within the NHS. Florence also shared with us her perspective as a carer for her mum who lived with sickle cell and was forced into early retirement as a result. Of course, we also discussed the No One's Listening report because having to call 999 from your hospital bed is evidence enough that the UK healthcare system does not understand or appreciate the struggles of the most common genetic disorder in the UK, which is sickle cell disease. So we will continue to talk about the No One's Listening report until people start to listen. Just a heads up for those of you that are listening, Michael's voice will be heard in this interview. So without further ado, let's talk about sickle cell with Florence Eshalomi MP.
Florence, the APPG report was released in November 2021, which was called No One's Listening, because for a long time nobody really was. Sickle cell anemia has devastated generations of the Afro-Caribbean community. Why do you think it's taken so long?
I think on the really tragic death of Evan Smith back in April 2019, a number of us read the report from that and just thought, is this really still happening to sickle patients? And the report came about because the fact that there are so many people suffering with sickle cell anemia in this country, but yet the very same people working in the health profession some of them do not know how to respond to that. And it was the discrimination, it was the lack of understanding, lack of training within the very same health professionals, to the point where, the report title was No One Is Listening. And how can we look at unavoidable deaths? Because these deaths can be unavoidable for people suffering with sickle cell. And, challenging some of the stigma. And if we're really honest, challenging the racism within the NHS with sickle patients. And I think going forward, after we've seen what happened during the pandemic, we've seen what happened with Black Lives Matter, it's really important when we talk about equality, it means equality for all. When we talk about an NHS system, it means an NHS system that doesn't discriminate some of the most vulnerable people. And we need to look at a case where we need to increase awareness around sickle cell disease. We need to increase the training. But most importantly, one of the things I want to do in my role as an MP is increase funding.
When, for anybody who knows that the report was followed by a very, very moving debate which you participated in, and you weren't afraid to address the issue of structural racism within the NHS head on. I think it was you that made that point. Why do you think that is still such an issue in 2021?
The main reality of that is because it's predominantly a disease that affects Black and minority ethnic people, predominantly Black Africans and Black Caribbeans. I think as we're finding more mixed couples, more mixed children, more people are actually carrying a sickle trait. And I'm hoping that will bring more funding, more awareness. But we have to be honest to address the elephant in the room around the structural inequality and structural racism that sadly exists within our NHS. And this comes back to the fact that, you saw Evan having to call 999 in his hospital bed to try and get treatment. He was in hospital. That should never happen. And there are other areas where, some of the issues of racism within the NHS has been exposed. So the fact that Black women are more likely to die 4 times out of 5 in terms of within the maternal service. We need to look at how we discuss this. But on the flip side, we look at the workforce within the NHS. I'm proud of having St Thomas's Hospital in my constituency, where the workforce is predominantly BME. But when you look at senior leadership, it's not reflected. So it's how we make sure that we address the issues of racism, we address the issues of staff promotion, but equally we address the training from the grassroots level. I want to see training for trainees entering the health profession. It shouldn't be on sickle cell patients to be training and telling those professionals about the disease and about their symptoms. They should come into the profession knowing about sickle cell disease.
Just to follow on from what you said, a lot of the sickle cell community have almost said things like, it shouldn't have taken so long for a report of this nature to come about for MPs and basically other people in higher positions to become aware of what's been happening for years. Do you have experience of any of the findings that came from the report in your own personal experience with your mum having sickle cell? And in comparison from that time to now, was it shocking to find that nothing has changed within that time?
It was, and it was painful to read that report. It was painful to listen to some of the testimonies because it brought back some of the memories that I experienced with my mum as she was a sickle patient. And I look back on the fact of when I was, younger and as her carer, when we'd be trying to manage her pain threshold, range of pain relief, heat pads, rubbing her legs, rubbing her back, and then assessing to say, actually, we think we need to go to A&E now. Do we call the ambulance or do we drive there? When we then get there, it's a busy A&E, trying to get the doctors to understand that actually she needs something much stronger. Paracetamol is not doing it. And then believe in you because, again, there's no visible sign of blood or, getting them to understand. And to think that what Evan must have gone through and what other sickle patients have been going through, it seems like actually there's been some improvements, but it hasn't been enough. So that was quite painful.
How did your mother's struggle with sickle cell become your inspiration and drive into politics?
Her strength and determination to never give up. She was a very strong woman. I'm one of three. My mum had 3 girls. And again, you look at the life expectancy for sickle patients. My mum she died when she was 60. Again, one of the side effects of sickle cell is that you have other additional complications. So in later life, she developed renal failure and she was on dialysis 3 times a week. But her strength and determination and never giving up, not letting sickle cell determine what she wanted to do. She lived life, she enjoyed her life. My mum loved to party. My mum instilled in my sisters and I the fact that we can do anything we want to. But one thing that my mum also did was she didn't actually tell me that I had sickle trait. And I only found out when I got pregnant. And, I challenged my mum. I was like, why didn't you tell me that I had this trait? She was like, because I don't want you to feel that that's going to hold you back. So that did push and inspire me in terms of, actually I can do anything I want to be. And she was quite supportive of my role. And, the key thing that I took from her, and I think other sickle patients, which I see, is that despite the challenges that they face sometimes on a daily basis, sickle patients are so strong. They are determined to enjoy life. And all of us must take inspiration from that as well and, look at what we can do to make sure their situation's a lot better and help them in terms of navigating, whether it's the NHS system, housing, navigating discrimination at work, navigating young people who are at school where their teachers may not believe them that they're ill. We can be their voice as well, the same way I was my mother's voice.
I have SS sickle cell, those as Janika, so we know kind of where you're coming from, certainly from that perspective. Now, being a child of a parent with sickle cell as opposed to being a parent of a child with sickle cell is clearly a different experience. How much did the issue of awareness or lack of affect your relationship with your mother? Because I can imagine that from a mother's point of view, when you have children with sickle cell, you're very protective, you look out for them, there's certain things that they cannot do, they don't really understand that. But from a child's point of view, looking up at your mother, that's kind of a whole different dynamic. So how's was yours?
From a very young age, I knew that my mum always had to take medication. I'm like, when you're younger, you're thinking, is it sweets? What's she taking? And I think it was when I was around 6 or 7, she'd be short of breath, she'd have to sit down, walking upstairs would be difficult for her. And that was the time when my sister was born. So my mum, sadly my parents split up, and my mum would tell me about the fact that, when she's in pain, I'd have to help her a bit more with the washing, simple things like filling up the kettle with water, helping her, being more hands-on. And, being the eldest, I just took that in my stride. And I think it was when I was coming up towards my late teens that I've got a better understanding. She'd spoke to me about what she has, and that she's still here, she's not going anywhere, but she has this disease. And I learned about the different medications she had to take, so why she had to keep up her folic acid, the fact that she had to take penicillin, so that in terms of infections, I knew that if someone was ill, they couldn't be around her because she's more immune to catching those infections. Again, as I got older, I was a signatory on a number of her accounts in terms of helping her access that. My mum was on benefits, navigating the DWP, phoning them to say, you haven't paid her this week. This means we literally will not eat. And she can't work, explaining to them for the 100th time why she can't work, because they just think, people just want to sit at home and claim benefits. Days when she'd be so ill, we'd be up all night. I'd literally be with her, rubbing her back or rubbing her legs, and knowing that I've got to go to school the next day, trying to explain to my teachers why I'm late or why I'm not concentrating properly. And if I'm honest, there were times when it was emotional, it was draining, it was tiring for me, and you feel a sense of guilt when you're not there. I always felt guilty because I'm like, what if my mum needs me and I'm not around? As my sisters got older, we shared that load. I started driving from an early age, as soon as I was 16, because I used to take her to appointments. And when it was time for me to go to university, I didn't want to leave, so I commuted from home because, again, my mum needed me. But again, I go back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of she always continued to push me, and equally, she didn't want to let her disease stop her from enjoying life as well. And, I think that's where the difference is in terms of me being a child of someone who suffers from sickle cell as opposed to, obviously, both of you experiencing sickle cell full-blown.
Yeah. Was there a significant time as you were growing up when it dawned on you that this is a serious condition, even though your mum, because I always think that no matter how much you can tell people and explain to them what sickle cell is and how it affects you, for friends, for family members, it takes one time where they actually see it to think, oh my gosh, words don't even correlate to what it is. Is there a significant time that you can remember when?
Yeah, so I remember it was a transition between when I was leaving primary school to go to secondary school. And we went to do the visit as year sixes, and turning up at secondary school, you're like, wow, this place is big. It's so big. And I clearly remember that time because it was in the summer. We still had our summer uniform, our checked red and white summer dress. And I got called out because my mum had been rushed to hospital. So I left and went back home, and I travelled to the hospital with my aunt up to King's, and she was in ICU. Her oxygen sat had fallen so low, her oxygen saturation was low. She wasn't breathing, so they'd put her on a breathing. She was on, and I thought, oh my gosh. And when you see your parent with so many tubes on them, you think, you're quite scared because you don't know what's going on. And I thought, that's when I knew that actually this disease and the pain threshold that we've been doing, managing at home, the hot water bottles that we've got, the little oxygen saturation machine that I know how to operate, actually, this has gone past that now. Without proper care and treatment, this is what could happen to her. But going back to what I said about my mum being so strong, we're Christians, we're prayerful. And I remember my aunts around her bedside were all praying. And, my mum's been in ICU on 3 occasions. And I remember the 3rd occasion, this was when I was doing my A-levels, the doctor was like, no, we're going to switch it off. And I think my mum moved her hand as if to say, yeah, I ain't going nowhere.
Don't fix
Do you understand? Because one of my mum's main things was that, she's going to make sure all her daughters get married and she's going to see her grandchildren. And my mum got to do that before she died.
I mean, the one thing that always strikes me about carers, young carers, is how quickly they mature. not just whether it's sickle cell, their parents got sickle cell, they've got cancer, and how quickly they're mature, which I often find, you can only admire that. So your mum must be incredibly proud of you and your achievements, because, I mean, let's face it, what you've achieved by becoming an MP is an exceptional achievement for a woman, and particularly a woman of colour. Do you often find the key components to a successful career, whether it be in politics or even motherhood, are actually quite basic, i.e. strength, determination and self-belief?
They are, and I think you look at how we support each other, empower each other. I've had a number of great women support me throughout my career, and some great men as well. I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't challenging sometimes. I'd be lying to you if I said the level of abuse, racism, sexism that I face as a black woman in politics, even as a black woman representing a London constituency, quite a diverse constituency. But then I think to myself, do you know what, I've got a place here. I was elected in my own right like every other MP, and it's incumbent on me to make every other little girl think that and know that they can achieve. I still feel quite humbled to know that a girl from a council estate from Brixton is now on those green benches. I sometimes pinch myself whilst rushing back to my office to eat my jollof rice. But equally, I'm not going to say I've got all the answers, but I think we need to make sure our politics, our health service, media, fashion, all sectors of society needs to be more diverse so that we can address some of the issues that sadly we are still facing in 2022.
Okay, well, I've got two more quick questions because I know we're running out of time. First question, how do you cope with the negative stereotypes and double standards at the hands of the media?
Oh gosh. Yeah, it's, you see it's still being played out now even. I'll let you in on a secret. I'm one of 16 now, black female MPs. I think they've got my name wrong on about 4 occasions already. The stereotypes of, and it's the same things, it's the same issues I raise in Parliament on behalf of my constituents, the fact that some of my young people get stereotyped for being gang members, for being troublemakers. Some of the young girls get stereotyped for being feckless, teenage mothers. People making assumptions about you, thinking you're not a politician. So it's really important that we continue to challenge those stereotypes. We continue to call out some of the unconscious bias. We continue to look at how we can address some of the policies, some of the issues that we're seeing within the Met Police, within the health service, within employment, making sure that we are working towards a society where we respect everyone's diversity, we respect tolerance, but equally we call out some of that racism. I don't want your allyship for you to just turn your Twitter feed black for one day. I want you to call it out at work when you see it. I want you to ask your director why there are no senior BME people in your organisation. I want you to look at your employment ratio in terms of staffing. That's what true allyship to me looks like, not one day of turning your Twitter screen black. Thank you very much.
It's so true. Sorry, on the back of that, I feel like it flows into also what we're seeing within the healthcare. It's a whole system, because going back to the report, obviously racism was one of the things that have been raised in terms of the things that we face within, in A&E, being judged, labelled as kind of, drug seekers and things like that. It's all round. It's a system. It's a systemic thing.
It is, and who's going to listen and who's going to make sure they take on board those things, and to think that patients aren't believed for their pain threshold, and you're viewing them as someone being addicted to diamorphine. No, but if this was a disease that affected predominantly white people, would they take that view?
What advice would you like to offer mothers, fathers, sisters or brothers of a sickle cell warrior?
What advice? Firstly, thank you. Thank you for championing and supporting your sickle cell warrior. Thank you for being there and listening to them. Thank you for advocating on their behalf. The advice I would give them, never give up. There will be so many hard days. There are going to be so many long nights. But what you are doing makes such an invaluable difference to that person's life. They value you, they appreciate you. And there's only a few of us here in Parliament, but know that, in us you've got people that will continue to champion, will continue to raise the issues about sickle cell. We'll try and get some of those changes that we desperately need within the NHS service so that we have to change that report title from "No one's listening" to "Everyone is listening."
Okay. And please never lose sight of the fact that having someone that looks like us, that speaks like us, and speaking for us means an awful lot to people like myself and like Janika, who have sickle cell and have been ignored. Why? Before the conversation started, and now obviously people are starting to listen. So thanks for that, because it means an awful lot to people like us.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing your personal stories, because that's what's so valuable, and that's what's more powerful for us to say. There are people continuing to live with this, but equally they just want you to listen.
That is all for this week. Remember, you can contact us and reach out on our socials. We have TikTok and Instagram, and it's at Sickle Cell Podcast. I will be back real soon for another episode of Let's Talk About Sickle Cell. Take care.